Season 5, Episode 6 of the hit HBO show Girls, titled The Panic in Central Park, or as many of us fans like to call it, the Marnie episode, really takes the audience on a journey with the character of Marnie Michaels. The episode drew wide acclaim from both fans and critics who lauded the writing, acting, cinematography. The evocative standalone episode really implements rhetorical strategies to effectively caution how nostalgia can distort our sense of reality and the dangers of it. We see rhetorical tools such as narratives, such as rhetorical situation, effective economies, relying on emotional appeal through pathos to really drive home the idea of really centering Marnie's perspective, putting ourselves in her shoes and experiencing that same sense of longing and that same sense of eventual disappointment by the end. We can start off with rhetorical situation first. So rhetorical situation, as put by Halsby, really is exigence, audience, constraints. Our exigence, an anecdotic Marnie who is unhappy in both her marriage and her career, unfortunately more relatable than I wish I could say, but relatable for many of us in all honesty. And this really kind of allows us as the audience to become emotionally invested in Marnie. Again, exigence is defined by Halsby as imperfection marked by urgency. Marnie's current marriage is erratic, and the catalyst for this episode is an argument with her husband. And when it comes to audience, we need to be capable of being influenced by discourse and to be able to be mediators of change. The audience is meant to be as confused as Marnie is when we first see Charlie. But also, we have to acknowledge that we would likely go on the same seemingly magical journey with our own Charlie. And up until this point, yes, Marnie was largely viewed as naive by the audience. Allison Williams, who plays her, even said that, despite all this, the episode still works as an exercise of wish fulfillment nostalgia, which is a term that I just adore that term. And again, Williams explains how we all have one person who, if we saw them on the street, it'd feel as though we just want to have one last journey with them, especially if there's unfinished business. Lastly, constraints are defined as Halsby as events, persons, objects that all have the maybe power to constrain decision making and action. Some of the constraints in this case include Marnie's shallow or awful tendencies, and she honestly didn't really show much change up until this episode. She frequently gave up parts of her identity while in relationships, and despite Charlie's return providing the ground for our exigence, his reveal as a heroin addict only serves as a subsequent reminder as to why it is so important to take off the rose-colored glasses at times. Halsby really thought that a story is never just a story. That narrative is not just about people telling the story, but it's really about the ways that the future could have been different. The way that narrative was utilized for the episode highlights Halsby's idea that story is never just a story. That narrative is about the people telling the story, in our case, Marnie and Charlie, ways that the future could have been different. They're in the literal reality where we see them together to this day. Contemporary issues that the storytellers may be experiencing. Charlie's heroin abuse, Marnie's unhappy marriage and career. This serendipitous encounter that only occurred due to a fight that Marnie had with her husband, which ultimately resulted in Marnie and Charlie having a day which we know was almost too good to be true, because it was. And where the audience and the characters are able to envision a reality in which they ultimately resolve their issues. Narratives are able to reshape memory, retell the past, live in alternate futures. Narratives are not only important due to the ways in which they reflect the values of the storytellers who create them, but because they are also a reflection of the audience who consumes these stories. What we're being told, what the rhetoric that's being pushed, has to do with the fact that we see Charlie buy Marnie a new dress. We see them go on a romantic dinner. We see them end the night at Charlie's apartment. And while the episode initially presents this reunion as an aspirational night, and that is something that even Allison Williams, who plays Marnie, was hesitant to admit, it ultimately still exposes the illusion laying beneath when we find out that Charlie has been using heroin. Something that I think is also just so underrated is the Form 1 aesthetic elements, the cinematography, as I mentioned, being able to show the distance between Marnie and Charlie, allowing for the viewers to feel Marnie's worsened perception of Charlie, who literally left her when they were supposed to get married. Once this reveal occurs, though, Marnie understands why she hardly recognized him at first, which speaks to the major changes that they've both undergone in life. Marnie, no longer in the magic of it all, suddenly realizing why Charlie was being so erratic, so manic, having such odd behavior, coming and going, like between the shots showing him coming between the bathroom frequently. And Lena Dunham, who wrote the episode, highlights how the reveal ultimately ripped away the veil as to why she was not with Charlie, and why she should not even be with her current husband. The episode highlights the dangers of nostalgia, because no matter how much we think we know people even after a long time, despite how well we may have known them in the past, that doesn't mean that we know them in the current. Marnie was under the impression that the same Charlie that she fell in love for was the same Charlie that she was seeing now. However, this massive change was also due to the changes that Marnie had undergone in life. As people, we tend to ignore our very own progress for the sake of trying to fit into a life that no longer suits us. I mean, Lena Dunham really captured this grief that comes not only from realizing that the people that we once knew are often unrecognizable to us at the current stage of our lives, but the realization that our current life may not even suit us. It may not even be as great as we thought it was. Marnie, disillusioned, leaves her husband, mentioning how she was never wanting to marry him to begin with, but she just didn't want to give up on yet another dream. Something unfortunately very relatable. And you know, it really speaks to this newfound growth that she really has gotten just from this one day of being with Charlie. And her husband ultimately attempts to ridicule her when she decides to leave him, even stating that she will likely get murdered because she does not know how to take care of herself. And frankly, is he right? Potentially. But who cares? Because at the end of the day, Marnie realized her worth, deciding to ignore him. And then we then see the episode end with her getting into her best friend's bed after the day that she had. You can really feel how tired mentally and physically that she is. And Walter Fisher argued that stories are not just a good story, good statistics, but rather that narrative is a core tenet of rhetoric. Humans exist in a series of bottle episodes, like Marnie, with continuing narratives. Narrative is symbolic action. Words that have sequence and meaning by those who embody them, us humans, rational beings that argue based upon good reason, but ultimately we are still storytellers. And if this episode rings true to you, it's because of this concept of narrative fidelity. Despite Marnie being a very polarizing character for many viewers, the narrative was built on real-world experiences that really, allow us to admit that sometimes we may dislike her because she resonates with parts that we don't really find ourselves liking in ourselves. We watch Marnie go through the worst 18 hours of her life. We watch this crash and burn. It's so easy to sympathize or empathize with her in this case. And, Marnie's commitment to love, which results in this hardship, a relatable experience for many of us. We still don't see Marnie sway when it comes to Charlie's heroin addiction. We see her remain firm in her commitment to do better. And as Halsby highlights, these aspects of this panic in Central Park really allow the audience to be influenced and resonate with the experiences shown throughout the episode. And this is why many critics and fans praise the episode's writing, because it feels like a fever dream. The evocative episode is able to use narrative and rhetorical situations, effective economies, and more to really allow the audience to resonate with what Marnie has just endured. The episode serves as a reminder that nostalgia can blind us in our judgment. Holding on to the past only stunts personal growth. It can be scary to start again, to admit that something did not work out like we had originally planned. However, I argue there is beauty in rediscovering your voice, your dreams, analyzing how you want your life to look. There's a reason that the episode remains a fan favorite, even a decade later.
You wrote that over the weekend when you were in a weird mood. Is that true?
I wrote over the weekend when I was in a weird mood.
It's like, does she know how iconic she is?
Panicked in Central Park was...
This is the episode. The TikTok and the internet.
That episode is so interesting because I feel like it becomes resonant once you have enough of a past somewhere. You have to have an X with meaning or an unfinished story. And so as people age and go through things in life, that episode means different things to them, because once you have a person that you could run into in that way
And have your heart drop that way.
exactly,
Yeah.
then it means a whole other
Yeah,
thing.
that's what I think.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why people are resonating with it, because it brings you back to like a moment like that you've had.